Hi everyone, my name is Birkin Dolphy. I have been with the Bioneers Intercultural Conversation Group since about 2017, and it's my highest honor and privilege to be able to be here with these three incredible women and speak about the rights of nature. So you're all here because you know that our current legal system is absolutely broken. And we have a court system in which people can go and have their grievances and their harms and their damages addressed. But unfortunately, the doors of the court system are closed to nature, and the mechanisms for seeking justice or for stopping harm, for coming to nature, is exceedingly difficult. And so we're here to talk about a new legal concept that's not new at all. In fact, it's rooted in the awareness that we are not separate from nature, but we are a part of nature. And I would just like to start by introducing our panelists. We have Matariki Carr, who's been an incredible force in securing legal personhood for a very sacred river in her community. We have Samantha Skenendor, who's also a force working for tribes, having land put back in trust, representing sovereignty and self-determination, being a voice. And then Danielle Green-Deer, who has brought the rights of nature movement to her community in the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation and is a tireless advocate for using this movement to ensure that your community has greater stewardship and control over the ecosystems in your territory. So I would like to just start by asking you, Matariki, to share some of your journey in terms of how you came to this movement and what is so unique and special about what New Zealand was able to do.
Great. Oh, well, kia ora tātou, mauri ora ki te whare. I'm from Ngāi Tūhoe and Ngāti Awa tribal nations in the heart of the Great Fish of Maui, which is from the east coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand. So background is, I'll be talking more today about Te Urewera rainforest. The rainforest was granted legal personhood in 2014 as a result of our treaty settlement. And the treaty settlement that is part of is the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which was signed in 1840. And I think it's important to point out that our legal systems and our histories are really different. And so you might hear some of those differences as we discuss today. But I think one really crucial fact is in Aotearoa we have one treaty, and that goes between Māori people, sovereign hapu o Māori, and the British Crown. And that was signed in 1840. And then from my people of Ngāi Tūhoe, we didn't have any meaningful contact with the British Crown until 1866 when they came in and confiscated a bunch of our land. So our history, our proximity to those ancestors is just great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers, and the language where I am and the rainforest herself is still in a very similar state to what she was in, except for the introduction of a lot of pest species who have degraded the rainforest. So that's important context, because that means that when we look at the space of the rainforest, she's still intact, largely intact. And Tūhoe, it's our homeland. So before 2014, she was a national park. From the 1950s, she was made into a national park and therefore disconnected from the people of Ngāi Tūhoe. And that was a very, very harmful part of our history, because that was the first time that we were so disconnected that we couldn't exercise or practice any authority, food gathering, building of our homes, our connection with our mother. So the return of Te Urewera into legal personhood for us is a return within the settler colonial legal system, but carving out a space for us to relate to her as our mother again. So no longer is she property owned by the Crown. She is a landscape, her own body, owned by herself, vested in herself. She has a board that's appointed to speak on her behalf, and that board has 6 Tūhoe and 3 Crown representatives. And in 2017, we created Te Kawa o Te Urewera, which is known as the management plan under the Act. So it has teeth. It's enforceable in the settler colonial law, but Te Kawa o Te Urewera is the law of Te Urewera as understood and applied by Ngāi Tūhoe. And the crucial part of that is we're rejecting resource management, which is how the settler colonial law manages all other law, and we're embracing human management for the benefit of the land. And that's a simple flip. And what it recognizes is that nature, Te Urewera, Papa Tuanuku, she's fine. She knows what she's up to. She's been doing it for millennia. It's us humans who need management. We're the ones that are out of control, you know? Yeah. So, yeah. That's where we're at. That's our starting point constitutionally.
And that's where this idea of legal personhood is kind of leading the force in a new environmental movement. I've always said that if our current environmental laws were working, we wouldn't even be here having this conversation right now. If the people in Atlanta could go to the court system and try to stop Cop City in the name of the forest, we wouldn't be here right now. If people could easily go to court and say, I do not want a frack waste injection site in my community, we would not be here right now. If tribes could go to the federal government and say, we can steward this, we can manage this, we know how to rehabilitate this ecosystem, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But our court system has created rules called standing that have stopped environmentalists from being able to basically speak for the trees in legalese. There's so much bureaucratic red tape that our judicial system has made up that even when Congress speaks in terms of the Endangered Species Act, it's difficult to actually see these laws enforced because our court system wants to see an economic injury. And so I would like to ask Samantha, who is a real lawyer, and I am just a law student and an intern, to kind of help us unpack and understand this idea of standing and why is it so hard for nature to see her rights respected in our court system.
Right, and to answer the question, truthfully, you have to kind of go back before America was America, and you have to look at nature as herself and as himself or themselves before these laws were imposed upon their rights. And I think you're not really a legal scholar until you say, well, what is the original law of the land? And you look at the population of America, of the United States before colonization, and all of the laws, the international law, the intercourse laws that were in place, the laws between marrying between tribes, the stewardship laws, the population control laws. Like I hear stories from my own elders that say we had too many people in this area, so we moved a band east or we moved a band south, and that was part of their stewardship plan. They practiced those sorts of things since time immemorial, and that was the law of the land. And there's so much more to learn about what is the rights of this species or this person. What are they individually and collectively? And so there's so much to explore. But we look then at the American system that came in, and we look at the first seminal cases regarding property. And in the United States, it really is property law. That's the foundational law of the United States of America. We have to deal with different things we don't agree with, like the doctrine of discovery and all sorts of other things. But we look at the original law of the land, and we look at how it has transposed into American law and where is it going now? So it's you never time set, right? I mean, standing today is whether I can bring a case. Do I have standing under this judicial rule and under this judicial process to be able to bring a case against somebody or something or myself? And what do I have to show to get in front of a judge for us to get to the merits to find out what does somebody owe me to make me whole again from my loss, my damage, my loss of economic interest? How do I get that back? And our court systems are flooded with those arguments. They're flooded with cases that, my property was, I was impaired from my property. I lost economic interest. I wanted to subdivide my property and put condos here. And because you did X, Y, or Z, I now can't do that. So I am due this money that I would have made had I been able to subdivide and put, a multi-mixed use plan in place on my property. And that's where the money gets to be really big money. And we think about things, in terms of rights of nature, like how sometimes simple it is to repair damage to nature and even letting nature itself repair itself. And we put that in context with the damages and the claims and reliefs in the court system for these claims, these property right claims that are here in the United States. But it really started with the seminal Marshall Trilogy, where Chief Justice John Marshall, the original Supreme Court Justice of the United States Supreme Court, looked over 3 major cases that decided what were the rights of natives in terms of their property, what are property rights here, and how does the government control and oversee and adjudicate, claims regarding property. So those 3 cases all involved Native Americans, indigenous peoples, Cherokee Nation, the Pankenshaw Indians, out by Ohio. So they involved natives, but guess what? In the first case, natives weren't even at the table. That tribe, when they were deciding whether or not that tribe had the right to sell their own land, they were not even at the table as a party. They did not have legal counsel. And so when I say that's important to think about standing, because tribes, when they decided what property was in the United States, they were not at the table with the Marshall Trilogy and in those seminal early cases that are still good law, that I have an oath to uphold as a lawyer. It's still good law today. So when we look at how that has transformed into a lawsuit today, we know that there certainly has to be jurisdiction, there has to be damages, you have to be able to have personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction over the claim that is in front of you. And you have to meet these requirements for you to even get to what's the damages, and are they legitimate damages, and do we bring in expert witnesses to say it's $10 or it's $10 million. So that's the process the American system and how it's evolved has come here to be. And now we're at this point where we look at rights of nature and we say, okay, if I can go down the street in Madison, Wisconsin from my law firm and open a company with anybody in this room, that company would have a right of personhood. That company would have more personhood rights than the water, the trees, the four-leggeds, anything else, in a matter of minutes. The laws protect a corporation and give them personhood and standing, again, in the system I just described, where it takes a lot more work on this end to look at nature and give her personhood. When anybody can do it, any of us can do it almost in any state in the same day. So if you think about the context of what system we're dealing with, we then have to look at the legal challenges to what I call as a workaround. How do we get where we need to be, where we all agree on personhood, and what does personhood look like for one particular area? So that's kind of the transition. And when we talked about her case, where it was different, the tribes had one treaty, right? The indigenous people had one treaty to deal with, and they granted the crown the right to pass their own laws that govern their people. So when you think about, people, foreigners coming into your country, and you having jurisdiction and authority over them under your current law, your original law, and then saying, okay, in the spirit of, diplomacy or goodwill, you're welcome to our land. Your government the crown can create the laws that apply to you and enforce them there, and we'll do the same for our people. And so that's the world that has led to the outcome of being able to add personhood to her world. And so you see the 2 different veins of how we went about colonization, and how an achievable outcome was more doable in her part of the world, and where we have really significant challenges here in the United States.
What's so powerful about Indigenous communities taking the lead in this movement is that our Constitution says that treaties are the highest law of the land. And the process of creating treaties by our United States federal government was a way for the government to legitimize itself to Europe. It was a sort of like, look at us, we're a big boy country now. We deal with the locals, we're real. It was in part and parcel of a form of colonization and exploitation, but it was also a signaling of legitimacy, because when you are establishing yourself as a nation and you are dealing with other nations. So the first peoples here were treated as separate nations. And it's just very ironic and beautiful and timely that First Peoples are the people taking this movement, to the extent, and Danielle, you brought this up in our conversation earlier, that it's because the idea of legal personhood or personhood for nature is not a legal Western concept, it's an Indigenous concept. So.
Yeah, this is nothing new to us. And it's really sad, or I wouldn't say ironic, but it's a little slap in the face, in my opinion, being from one of the tribes that was first contact 400 years ago, where there were and still are endless attacks on our existence that just haven't worked. And the fact that we're still in our original homelands, in Mashpee, Massachusetts, we're still eating our original foods, we are still practicing our culture, we've revived our language. We're living proof that we don't need a treaty or property to exist. We have persevered just with the inherent strength of being a part of the land. And to me, when I think of the rights of nature, and I think of our collective indigenous presence, you know, I always think of the quote, like, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And so now we've morphed into new ways of living and existing amongst this imposter system. And here they come saying, hey, we really messed up. Can you give us your traditional ecological knowledge so we can fix this problem? And so, you know, we'll respond, and we are responding with our rights of nature movement, with our rights of herring movement, because that's our mother. We'll always protect her, we'll always respond, we'll always be there. But we've now become savvy with the system, and we're like, well, what does control look like? What does jurisdiction look like? How are we protecting our intellectual property and our traditional ecological knowledge so you don't extract it again and morph it into your interpretation of that? How do we also protect ourselves from 400 years of this colonial mindset to where, yeah, let's take over jurisdiction, but let's not make the mistake of just becoming our oppressors, you know, just out of the simple fact that we've been so deprived of our resources. So those are internal conversations that we're having when it comes to the community organizing aspect of the rights of nature in Mashpee. It's looking at our capacity as a people to say, how do we protect this? What does this even mean to us? And how do we do it in a way where we're being honorable, and we're calling upon our genetic memory, we're calling upon our elders, we're calling upon our youth. It's like an open invitation for everybody now to stand up for our mother, because now finally the opposing party is interested in becoming a part of nature rather than its steward, its guardian, you know, what have you. But I just want to say that something that was said I think it was yesterday at the beginning of the Bioneers Conference, really resonated with me when Kenny was like, you know, we are the majority. We have to start acting like it. And that changed me for the whole day. Because sovereignty is a mindset. And I'm like, yeah, we don't need to keep being on the defense. We don't need to keep proving to them how legitimate we are or how sovereign we could be. We don't need to use their court systems. We have our own. We don't need to, you know, act within this imposed, you know, organizing where it's like legislature, chairman, council, like that's foreign to us. We need to go back to our origins and create our policies, our values, and organize in a way that we would just already be doing had it not been interrupted by colonization. And so there's a lot of work that we are doing on our end as a tribe, as just regular people. But the part that's most important that I'm trying to help our tribal members do is just to to be Indian, just to be sovereign, just to do it, just not to be afraid of it, and work on the offense, strengthen our courts, create our own laws, collaborate with other tribes. I mean, there's 577-ish tribes. I mean, we have a lot of power, untapped power. And so we can propel this movement forward in a very beautiful, organic way, and become the leaders in this new world paradigm, this new mindset that everybody is desperately seeking. So I'm excited to be a part of this movement, and I'm happy that people are here and they're listening, because what we said earlier is the information that we're sharing is alive. So we're planting those seeds in all of our minds, and it's a collective thought process that has to happen. But it's real, and it's something that is cool to me, because we don't have to operate in a system that's not working. We can step out. I don't have to wear one moccasin and one shoe. I can just wear both of my moccasins. Like there's those weird analogies where you have to be split between two worlds, and you don't.
Thank you. So one thing that I noticed as the intern to the Bioneers Rights of Nature program in the very beginning was I would call Samantha and I'd be like, wait a second, like if they pass this law, like how are we going to enforce it? The courts say that there's no jurisdiction over non-Indians. There's no jurisdiction if a violation happens on fee land. There's no jurisdiction if the state is a public 280 state. Samantha's like, Brittany, calm down. First of all, sovereignty is not given to people. Sovereignty is acted out. And even though the courts have done everything they can to take the bowl of sovereignty and stab as many holes in it as possible, it's still there. And this movement and this opportunity for tribes to pass a law that says, you see this ecosystem here? We will protect it. We will defend it in our court system. We will make rules. It is probably one of the most brilliant offensive moves to restore that bowl of sovereignty. So Samantha, I would ask if you could kind of help us understand the road that the concept of sovereignty, the hard road of sovereignty, and what it means to self-determine, and how this movement plays into advancing that for tribes.
And that's really the name of the game. I mean, the name of the game is that nobody else in the United States has political rights to pass laws and be governed by them on their own lands, except states, of course, and municipalities to some extent, but not to the level that tribes do. Tribes have an amazing amount of opportunities and a lot of resources, and they get federal aid to do these things, right? So it's kind of the perfect storm if we can think about the extent of sovereignty of rights of nature in all of these indigenous lands. I mean, you look at the Navajo Nation, right? 350,000 plus tribal members spanning across 4 states. Can you just imagine? And then you look at, tribes like myself, my tribe, Ho-Chunk, we're scattered from areas all the way from Minneapolis to Chicago. We have like 7, 8 major village areas that are still enunciated with sovereignty through tribal branch offices. So we have extensions of our government in our local areas, and which means we've had to integrate in and around the state of Wisconsin and the municipalities. We've had to enter into dozens of law enforcement agreements to say, okay, where does your law begin and end, and where does our law begin and end, and who's going to enforce it? And then, there's this whole aspect of, fines. Let's say we just keep fining somebody who keeps putting chemicals that are leaching into tribal lands and affecting, the rights of life and property on tribal land. Do we just keep giving them citations? And then what if they challenge them in court? Then we're in court, right? And then we have all these standing and other issues to go on with. So we think about sovereignty. How do we do this? How do we do this from one polar end where maybe we pass these as symbolic gestures? Maybe we want to let, and this is never up to me, it's up to a tribal government and, their attorneys, of course, saying, okay, here's your political status, tribe A. Here's what we see as the landscape for you to push out a law that could potentially be controversial, or you'll get pushed back from this particular company or this particular municipality. And how are you going to deal with it? Here's the game plan. So typically in the real world, there are tribal attorneys that are licensed in those jurisdictions that knows those tribal laws, who knows traditions and customs of that tribe, and knows all those other important aspects beyond, what is considered tribal jurisdiction. But I personally think I don't look at tribal jurisdiction. I look at ancestral land bases because that's the way, that's the way things really are when it comes down to it. And I think when tribes are looking at rights of nature, at least tribal leaders that I speak to are looking at it also as a holistic endeavor. I mean, there may be 3 or 4 bands of a tribe that are contiguous to each other and say, all right, we have the same cultural beliefs about personhood for our land and our resources. I don't like that word either. But let's work together and we'll pass a code. Let's work with the local municipalities and maybe have them delegate their municipal or state authority to the tribe. Because guess what? Some states are allowed to do that. Some states statutes allow municipalities to send over law enforcement, rulemaking, whatever they want to another local government. And in cases where I'm watching now, like cannabis, this cannabis market is developing throughout the United States and it's being legalized in all kinds of states. There's bills everywhere we're watching. We see places like in California where one of the counties actually turned over all authority of cannabis to the local tribe. And that covers the county, right? So, I mean, think about that. If we apply that to rights of nature, where our municipal and state governments were sharing in their authority, not just to pass laws, but also to enforce them, and then we played out that situation, and we mentioned earlier in the courts, I think obviously we're in a better place, right? So sovereignty for tribes then is really around very similar to in between of what we talked about of gaining the authority to actually enforce your own laws, right? You want them fully enforced. And the second part, what Danielle said, is the internal work that it takes to get there. And there's a lot of internal work that is very, very much ahead of all of these tribes. And it starts with our knowledge. And it starts with what we're calling traditional knowledge. And again, the federal government's coming after you, tribes, for your traditional ecological knowledge. And I could see that, I can argue all day long that that's a good thing, and I can argue all day long that that's a bad thing, because that is the mothership of who we are, is our traditional knowledge. And they're consulting us for this knowledge. There's in their asks, they say, we're not doing so well here. Our laws and our regulations, our funding schemes, how we are writing, our priorities in every administration isn't always working out well for the climate for a lot of people. So tell us, tribes, what we could be doing better. You guys hold the blueprint to America. Please share that with us so that we can do a better job. And so the tribes, some are, again, like, yay, we're happy to tell you what we know about this. And there's some tribes, and I, of course, legally, I would say caution, red flag, do you just send everything out? You just, give your baby up, without knowing where and what's going to happen? No, there's a lot of things that happen with that. There's this whole concept, and this is the internal piece that rights of nature, I think, in my mind, in 2023, right now in April, tribes need to focus on to get to where we're all talking we want to be. They need to focus on that knowledge and that pool of knowledge. Who has it? Who keeps it? How is it stored? Under what circumstances do we let it go out of the gate? And for what reasons? And how do we hold them accountable when they have it? It's just like intellectual property. If I'm Madonna, I'm going to care about where my words go on a record. And we are way better than any recording artist, right? Like, we have the blueprint. So that knowledge is special. And the best protections under IP laws in America need to apply to these tribes as they foster and grow and they internally organize into, hopefully, what I would envision, a reciprocal relationship around their traditional knowledge to go ahead with rights of nature, to say, maybe we'll just pass a code for water, that water has personhood, and we'll start with that. Or maybe we're going to go all out on the polar end and we're going to change our fabric of our governance, and we're going to extend a Bill of Rights to all of nature within the ancestral territory of X nation. So there's a polar end of starting with one resource, one named personhood, to all things have a Bill of Rights. And that tribe has to do that internal work to get there and decide if we're going to do this or this. We have to do a whole lot of legwork. We have to make sure we have a judicial system in order. We have to make sure we have some sort of equivalent to an environmental protection agency, right? We need to make sure our court processes are accurate. How do we find damages to our personhood? How do we speak to this person? And how does she speak to us? Who has the authority to translate that and put that into damages? And how do, and when damages come in, who has the authority to take those damages and make that person whole? Just like the system I described to you earlier. Who are those very, very important people that will be the first people in the United States to carry this out in an adversarial American system? They have to be so perfect to do this, right? So there's a lot of work to do it. We have a ton of resources. There are thousands of federal Indian lawyers like myself and tribal attorneys that know how to do these things, that could do these things. But I always jokingly say, but we need a client. We need a client.
Incredible. Thank you. So Matariki, how are we different in terms of like the settlement agreement and the board that was created to speak for and steward? There's obviously like some collaboration, but
Right.
how do you see tribal nations in the United States being able to learn from what happened in your country?
That's a good question. We are different. We're different in the sense that we don't have jurisdiction. Like our tribal nations are still in this shape. I use this shape quite a lot, where we were sovereign and we agreed to share space with these newcomers, and we did say, look, we're granting you a right to govern yourselves in these lands, subject to our tino rangatiratanga, our sovereignty, our self-determination. And that was Te Tiriti. That's what it said in Te Tiriti. But of course, over time, the legal system, the norm, the expectation, the culture went and overtook. And even by 1900s, they were talking about smoothing the pillow of the dying Māori race. That was the expectation. We would all just die out. But we didn't. Suckers. No. And so part of this treaty settlement is actually, this treaty settlement, is a Crown response to our voice, our loudness in the streets. And so they needed this institutional response to get us into a process that they designed. So there's inherent issues with treaty settlement processes, and it'll be same with in Canada, which we borrow a lot of ideas from. So there's issues there, but what it's created for Tūhoe and for Taranaki Mauna and for Whananui Awa, and they're all different legal persons. So there's a river that's a legal person, Whananui, and now just as of last week, Taranaki Mauna, which is stunning. Maunga Mountain out on the west coast of the North Island of Aotearoa has just been granted legal personhood too. So all of those have different stories, different structures and governance, but the heart of them is that the earth owns herself and we have responsibilities of care to her. And so actually, even though these are very related, we don't tend to talk about rights of nature so much. We tend to talk more about human responsibilities to nature, because inherently, and we've agreed, we know that nature already has rights. She doesn't need her youngest children to be like granting out rights to her. She's sweet. So we recognize it's about responsibilities, but in just tuning into what we're talking about here, it's like, if that's how we relate to Earth, we get to practice that. How we relate to each other needs to be inspired by that, needs to be inspired by the abundance of nature, the generosity, her aroha, her love for her people and for all of her living systems. And we have been colonized, so we have been traumatized. So we are a people, we can't just go and flick the switch and be self-governing and everything's sunshine and rainbows. Like, we've got a lot of work to do to restore ourselves and to remember and to be well and practice wellness, and then learn to practice authority and to recreate the abundance that we need. And I have this really cool quote, if you don't mind me using my cellular phone. This is by Ani Mikaere, who's a rad legal scholar in Aotearoa. She's awesome, look her up. And I love this quote for us here in California. It is crucial that Māori continue to think and to imagine beyond the intellectual imprisonment of what our colonizers deem to be realistic. So long as we do so, and so long as we do so in concert with our Indigenous sisters and brothers in our common struggle for self-determination, who can predict where the relation of forces may lead us? And that's so rad. because what was deemed realistic, 20 years ago, Te Urewera owning herself and having a majority of tūhoi be her voice and having Te Kawa, our own legal system, be her managing plan, was deemed unrealistic. It was deemed beyond the imagination. It wasn't possible. And so in listening and learning about jurisdiction and the majority and all these kōrero, these discussions that are coming out now, it's like, yes, there's a lot of power that we can share. And I would love to see more intra-Indigenous discussion of our legal systems, to remember that this legal system that's been brought over, this cosmovision from this Western world, and I do a lot of work with Spherical Studios on cosmovisions and understanding where this actually came from, this imposition of culture and legal systems, not Lego guys, legal systems came from, is so invisible that it's so normal to us, and we need to remember how to detach from that and remember our own legal systems and ways of being. And I feel like every time I meet Indigenous people from around the world, I'm reminded of something. It's like it wakes something else up in me about what's true for us. And I feel like that's where I want to be seeing new old governance systems. I don't want to have a tūhoi version of the Whakatane District Council. Like, I want to see a circular thing, I think. I think it's a circle, or the shape of a house. There's something else that's there that's more true to us, and how we make our decisions, how we share space peacefully together over time. Because that's all we have. We have geographical space. No one's making any more land. And we have time, and that's time that's come intergenerationally to us today, and time that's going to flow on to all of the descendants and people that come and share. So that's the mission. Yeah, kia ora.
Thank you. So one thing that gets brought up, and that's a big theme of this, is the word work, in that it takes a tremendous amount of work. How do you go and change an entire legal system? And Danielle, you mentioned the rights of herring, and your tribe is embarking on an incredible journey. And I would love for you to sort of tell us about the story of your tribe's relationship to this fish. And I'll just never forget the time we had a phone call and you're like, girl, these herring are hurting. And I'm like, yes, yes, they are. And just from that very simple awareness of that this is a part of your community and it's suffering. And you've done such an incredible job rallying your community. So please tell us what's going on with the rights of herring.
Well, as Mashpee Wampanoag people, we've always maintained our Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights. That's something that we've never compromised or given up. And so we're a very active community when it comes to hunting, foraging, gathering, fishing. And so this is something that a lot of our community members have been fighting against for a long time. And just in silos, just our fishermen have been going through it every time, they're out harvesting shellfish or fish. They're always being challenged by just local private landowners. So we still have that fight within us. And just one short year ago, when Bioneers came to the community and approached us with this rights of nature concept, it just clicked. It was like, oh, wow, there's actually a legal avenue that we can explore and strengthen. And there's a legitimate way that we can organize ourselves to stand up for what we love. And myself, Sam, Alexis Bunton, my husband David, we just jumped on it, and we created a community forum just to educate, just to engage, our elders, our traditional knowledge holders, and just to formalize the process and the concept. But it was nothing new. So we were preaching to the choir. We had the buy-in. It was just about, okay, so what do we do now? What do we do next? Yes, let's pass this. Let's get this going. So, and that was just the concept of rights of nature. When it came to picking one of the many issues or sentient beings that we want to protect, we naturally went with the herring. The herring is a fish that we actively rely on for sustenance. It's the signal of many other fish coming in and life starting to regenerate itself or bud. We have herring ceremonies. So, we use the herring for the fertilizer for our fields and our corn. So we chose to protect them first. But they won't be the last. There's many that once this is successful, which it will be, we'll move on to our quahogs, we'll move on to our lobsters, our shellfish, our corn, and we'll try to advocate and protect and speak on their behalf as much as we possibly can. But the way in which we do that has to be really inclusive. So it can't be, just one small group or just me facilitating it. And although I'm a member of the tribe and I have lived there, grown up there, I inherently have the right to speak on behalf of Mashpee. I don't know about all of nature, but Mashpee, I know. I am those lands at least. I am from those waters. But I did still have to be respectful of those in front of me, those next to me. So when it came to organizing, it has to be as inclusive as possible. And we engaged the youth because they are very important and in a space where they're not politically influenced. We're like, let's save the fish. They're like, yeah, all right. Obviously, we're going to save the fish, So it's like, okay. But when you're talking to a tribal councilman or the selectmen, it's like, well, I don't know, what is this going to look like for this person or this municipality or this company? So then, it gets messy when you're talking to adults who have some level of interest or some stake at risk. So this is a beautiful space for the youth to be involved. And they rose to the occasion so fast. Britt has been working with a lot of the youth and helping to organize that. And they've even, we were originally calling them just like the herring ambassadors. They're like, no. We are the native environmental ambassadors. Like we're not limiting ourselves to the herring, essentially. But they're so savvy. They came up with a logo. They came up with the Instagram. They came up with the GoFundMe all within a week. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a demographic that we're so used to pushing aside and making them exist in their own little world, in their own schools, in their own little bubbles. I'm like, this is what a community is. Everybody has a function. We can't keep relying upon our elders to do everything. The same group to do everything, to show up, to protest. So it's really nice to see the youth step up. And I'm just in the background. I'm just helping to plant the seeds of knowledge, to just help keep that fire going. I'm very passionate about this movement, but I can't do it all, obviously. So I need help. We all need help. And they are right there on the front lines. And it's been such a joy working with this movement. And I hope that, at least for this community organizing journey, for this participatory action, we could use all the buzzwords. I hope that we could be a model just to show other tribes and inspire other tribes that it's not that difficult, it's not that hard. You just need people to literally stand up and show up. So our goal, though, is right now the runs. Okay, so when you go to the herring run, we have 3 in the town of Mashpee. And one in particular is like, you described it as like the gauntlet of, like, so it's very steep. The way it was built, I don't know why it was built the way it was, but to me, it was not in favor of the migration of the herring. It was more so about, to me, restricting them to spawn and actually allowing more access for humans to catch them and use them as bait, essentially, for other fishing. But basically, it's just this concrete structure, and now they're counting them. So it's like, not only is the structure completely useless and inefficient, but they're gonna count the few that pass. I don't understand that. So it's like, they're all at the bottom, you know, exhausted, trying to jump up, and then they're waiting around, and then the current is so strong, it pushes them back down. And then they have this plexiglass where just one can pass through. And it's like, this is so foolish. Like, why does this exist? So we, as a tribal nation, are proposing that we could come up with something better. We can just get rid of this structure and create a more natural way that, and elongate the structure to where it would flow like a natural river, where they can go up to the pool and they spawn, and then they go about their day. And so, but what does that look like, though? It looks like begging the town for jurisdiction. Oh, please, can we take this over? You know, it's like, no, you recognize that you have, that this could be done better. You grant us the authority to take this over, help us get the funding to do so, and let's work in collaboration with stewarding these fish and just restructuring the runs. And once that's successful, we'll keep going. We'll look at another jurisdiction, because like you said, our ancestral territory extends well past just Mashpee. That's only where we are currently restricted to, you know. But we've existed in all of southeastern Massachusetts, and there's hundreds of runs in Massachusetts. And there's hundreds of people and tribal groups and tribes that could also take on this effort and do this in their own local jurisdiction or traditional homelands. So that's our goal. I think it's attainable, and we're working towards it. We have the youth drafting tribal resolutions. So this is a really great learning opportunity as well for them to just immerse themselves in the idea of federal tribal Indian law. And also because they are the future, they're working at something at this level, and hopefully when they come into their adulthood, they'll say, oh, I worked on that when I was 16, you know, or whatever. And so this is helping them to become active participants in their tribal governments, which is important too, because tribal council and tribal governments and tribal directors of these departments are also just in their adult world. You know, they don't realize the impact that it actually has on community members. So we have to show up for ourselves and become inclusive in our existence, and not just have, because that's how the United States is. It's so like just so like, let's just have this body of people making rules for everybody else, and we know that doesn't work. And 400 years later, our tribes are still struggling to navigate this imposter system. So we're taking it back, we're taking control, and we're being inclusive. And it's working.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just quickly add one thing that I think is important to replicate about what's happening with the Mashpee youth is that these youth are receiving scholarships and fellowships because community organizing is work. And if you're a part of an organization or you have the capacity to donate to an organization that can support youth, they wanted to do this work. They wanted to get involved. But when you tell them that your time is valuable and we're going to show you that it's valuable by compensating you for your efforts, it sets a standard within them that lets them know that their time, it's a tricky line because it's like, you don't want to commodify community organizing, but you also don't want to exploit them. So that's one thing that I'm incredibly proud of in this effort, in this program, is that these youth are being told and given support for their work. And the other thing that's incredibly beautiful about what's happening in Mashpee is that this isn't just an effort to pass a law to have a lawsuit. This isn't just an effort to pass a law to have some symbolic action happen. This is to pass a law to literally change a concrete obstruction and make way for fish to have a migratory route. And the same way with the Klamath River in the Yukon, they passed a rights of nature law and now we're undamming. And so Mashpee is right in line with that, where the law is going outside of the code and it's actually going into the material world, which is the goal. And you mentioned that, do you go to the town and you say oh, please, can you? And Samantha, I'm going to ask you to tell us exactly how do we do that, because sometimes, we look at rights of nature as this legal litigation strategy. How do we get nature in court for a lawsuit? But it doesn't always have to exist like that. Sometimes you establish the rights of nature, you set ordinances, you can prohibit certain chemicals, certain practices, you can rebuild ecosystems that have been damaged by obstructions. And you can go about it diplomatically too, in terms of telling them. So how does that process work, Samantha? How do tribes?
You got to have a client.
You got to have a client. Okay.
Well, and that's just it. Tribes have to be comfortable in talking about the extension of their sovereignty in this light. And that conversation, Danielle just described it, what it took so far in 1 year to get where they're at now. We're on the cusp of the youth developing their own voice in the process, because in this case, it's a clear strategy, and it's very much what I hear for a lot of other things with Indian country, being their attorney, is that we go with what the youth say. They're not going to listen to me as a lawyer. And then I was like, well, your youth have asked me about this thing, or they want to do something with this thing. And they said they have, well, what do we, and they'll talk to the elders, or the elders will talk to the youth. And then all of a sudden, the elders will have fancy cell phones and they'll be playing games because the kids thought it was important, and they're going to listen to the kids. And that's how intergenerational culture happens. That's how we carry this on. So how do we get there from a sovereignty perspective is one route is to educate the youth now, educate the next generation of leaders and let them grow with the movement, right? We have to get them very comfortable with getting their feet wet to go out there and eat the fish and to understand how it's used and to understand how people in the community go out and fish, to understand the history about it and what it could look like. They could watch these runs get deconstructed. I mean, what a glorious day, right? And they could be there when they reconstruct this smart run. They could sit there and do all of the science and help record the science with experts on how they could start counting the herring. And as they say, oh yeah, when I was 10, we only had this many that made it. Or before we did this, we only had this many that made it up the run. And now we have this many. And that is really how this movement happens, is a lot of it through the youth. If we step in midway and we talk, as Danielle had said, there's a way to go through tribal council as well, and there's a way where the elders drive the initiative too. And the elders, I say sometimes I feel bad, they are getting tired. They're getting exhausted. It's them coming up to tribal council and saying, hey, there's frack mining going on right outside of our ceremonial land. What's the tribe doing about it? And then you hear nothing, right? And it makes me think well, what is our network with environmental safeguards? Again, what is our EPA process for this tribe? How do you guys know what's going on? I know the work I worked on Aaron Brockovich level stuff is, I got a call from a watchdog and said, hey, Samantha, this company's doing this and it's in your tribal jurisdiction. What are you guys going to do about it? I'm like, well, I didn't know what was going on. I'll go talk to the lawyers, which was the right move. Had I talked to the council, it could have ended there, right? I talked to the lawyers looked it up. It was a legitimate claim we had, and a lawsuit was filed. So really, who carries these things forward? And it's, to me, it's kind of like all hands on deck. You got to be doing all these things And it takes grassroots organizers, qualified grassroots organizers, and I call it the glue. And often I'm the glue. I'm a paid glue. I'm a piece of glue. They pay me to see out a project that usually is really, really ugly on the front end, and maybe nobody's even talking to each other anymore. And I'm talking feds, prosecutors, you name it. I've been in closed doors with everybody mad at everybody. But I know I'm being hired to be glue, to figure out what the issues are, handhold, right, and make people comfortable around sometimes working with Indians. Sometimes that's really what the problem is the world we live in, the people we choose to be around, we're very comfortable around each other. But when there's these problems and they send us in, a lot of times we see that it's because there's just some sheer racism there and sheer jealousy. And that's really what it is. I've been told, hey, when you know anything about the law, you come talk to me. I was like, well, that's why I'm here, because I do know something about the law. It's called the Supremacy Clause, and your state laws don't apply here. So I'm here to talk about that, So it's like, thanks. But it is the glue of the strategy, and it means, and tribal leaders, we all want to talk about, they signed up for this job, right? They got voted in, they campaigned to do this, but they don't have the time or energy to do what we're talking about here. They are not your best candidates. We're like, how when you get in a marriage and you're like, who's better at paying the bills? Who's better at cutting the grass? Who's better at time with the kids? Who's better at homework? And you both don't want to agree that the other one's better at something, but when it comes down to it, eventually you figure that out and you just go with it, right? Working for tribes to me is no different. Like, who is better at what? And so I look at the council, and some people don't like, they'll be on council one term, like those one-termers. They have a better purpose. They'll go there and be like, okay, I can't do anything here, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And so those somewhere else people are to me are prime targets, because they know the best use of themselves. So the strategy from the elders, for example, and I think this is the first time I'm publicly mentioning it, but for the Ho-Chunk Nation, my Dega, my uncle Bill Greendeer, submitted a resolution to the people of the Ho-Chunk Nation, and they resoundingly passed a rights of nature law. And what they did was they set policy for the nation by passing this resolution that said, and then went to the extreme, as I mentioned, we're going to change our constitution to allow a Bill of Rights for all of nature in our jurisdiction. And that's huge. That's as far as, those are the strongest words in this movement we can use. The process never completed itself, so that did not become a change in our Constitution. But I am going to resubmit something, not on a constitutional level, because I think the constitutional level can fail us again and we'll lose another year, right? So baby steps, right? So my idea is I'll be submitting a resolution in September at our annual General Council meeting that affords rights of nature in consult with the traditional court and the tribal elders, because they're asking us to do this. When Bioneers did their workshop in Wisconsin Dells last year, you know who showed up? It wasn't the youth. It was a few tribal council members. Our chief and all of our clan, a lot of our clan leaders showed up. And so that sent huge messages to me that our elders are asking us to do something, and we don't have time not to do it. So I'll be working on that resolution with them specifically for what they're comfortable in doing. But it also needs to be more of a holistic approach, as I've learned this past year, and as we at Bioneers learn year after year, the more perfect answer and better strategies every time we talk to people, and we hear from people, and we learn, and we'll learn next year where Mashpee's at, right? And we'll learn next year where Ho-Chunk is at, and we'll learn where other tribes are at next year, and we'll learn a thing or two as we go along on this course. And I really hope that, for Ho-Chunk, that we do it unbridledly, that we do set up, and I know how I think I know how they work, I'm barred there, I should know how they work, that they have an EPA office, right? And they have these qualified people. And, I don't want outside lawyers coming in and filing motions in limine to challenge our tribal leaders and elders that are experts in caretaking. Like, you don't have a right to challenge the chief of our tribe, in my opinion. Like, that's traditions and customs of this tribe, and that's the rule of law. But, outside, they want to bring in these adversarial systems where you can challenge every expert, every person, and it costs a lot of money, and you get nowhere in the case to the point you end up settling, and nothing comes of that, right? Oftentimes, things don't come of that. So, to make this, a wraparound reality, I would like to submit resolutions that specifically speak to the Ho-Chunk structure that's there in concert, and of course, only with traditional elders' voices and guidance. So that's one thing we'll look at next year. Thanks.
So it's
This is obviously a movement that's not just about law, but it's about a value system, and it's about changing our language and the way that we refer to ourselves in relationship to our natural environment, to our mother, to this ecosystem that we're in. And Matariki, this is something that you've often spoke about and brought up, is that our language is so incredibly important in terms of movement making, and in terms of the community organizing and efforts that supported this settlement agreement. How do you see language and playing into organizing?
Language. Yeah, I think language is one part of expression, self-expression. And I think that what I notice within our communities is when a community has been oppressed, your ability to express yourself has also been oppressed, and your practice of expressing yourself, using language, of making art, whatever it is, has been harmed and limited. And so being able to have language, to even name that, and being able to then practice sharing and expressing ourselves from a place of truth is I think, a really crucial part of our healing and our movement forward. It's like I say, we have this legal infrastructure now, which is incredible, I believe, and I hope that it expands, and I hope that, more and more this legal personhood, or this recognition that nature is our mother, she's an atua, even more than a person, that we can recognize her like that, spreads, but the way that we then heal ourselves has to be centered in our self-determination, our expression. So I feel like our artists, our music makers, our poets, our healers, our people who do our karakia, our prayers, those are the kinds of people, that's the kind of language that I think we're all hungry for right now. And so that will open the door for us to actually remember and be able to connect with the language of nature, to be able to feel that and be connected to that again. So I think it's essential how we even conceive of connection. Language, we think about the whare tapa whā. With the whare tapa whā for us is like a health model. It kind of reminds me of the 4 colors, the 4 directions. The medicine wheel, thank you. Yeah, that's our version. And we have this taha tinana, the physical body, the taha hinenaro, which is the mental element, the taha wairua, which is the spiritual element, and we have the taha whānau, which is the family element. And I think another label for that family side is language, is reo, or connection, because that's our ability to connect to each other. And I think just on that, we, in practicing, need to flip the norm that we have imposed upon us, and also the other side. Sorry, just one last thought on this, of that oppression. The other kind of impact of the oppression on us is lateral violence that we have within our communities, and it's like probably our biggest challenge right now. And I can see it everywhere. I can see it within just organizations, Māori organizations, or even in Australia, First Nations people over there, it's in their WorkSafe website. Like, lateral violence can look like gossiping, bullying, pulling people down, the gleefulness that comes with being right, or one-upmanship of being above someone, and tall poppy syndrome, like all of those things. The reason why that's so rampant in our communities is because of oppression. If you are powerless, then you exercise power in any way that you can, and usually it's over the closest people to you, your most loved ones. And so that's where this, like, family violence, even that level, or lateral violence, where we cause harm. And until we can name that and address that and find ways around that, and I just shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown, because she does a lot of work in this way and she gives language to this area. I think she's rad, and I'd love for her to come to Aotearoa, so if you're listening, come over. That's the kind of thing that I think our movement needs a lot right now, so that we can express and move forward, move on to something way more colourful.
Well, we are coming short on our time. One of the jokes that I've made in my process of supporting this movement is I know that we can't tear down the master's house with the tools, but we know that lawyers are going to try. Um, and one thing that I wanted to say is that there are so many different political statuses of Indigenous people, and that no matter where you come from and no matter whether you are a state recognized tribe, a federally recognized tribe, a band, a municipality, a council, whether or not you're just a citizen of a state, there is a place for you in this movement, and you do not need the colonizers' IRA blessing, the federal recognition. And while we can move in those systems and while we can attempt to indigenize the law, it's not necessary to have that authority granted, because what we're really doing is we're pushing nature into our laws as the person that she is so that we can continue to live. And so I know we only have a few moments left. Is there a question that anyone has for what you can have one? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this rich discussion. As you're talking, I was thinking a lot. So, Ariel, in the discussion that we had before this, how much connection there is also between sovereignty movements, land back movements, and other, cultural language. All of these things are connected to the rights of nature, and how the law is certainly one piece of that, but this is a cultural revolution as well. And how do you see the connection between rights of nature and other Indigenous-led or other elements of our movements for justice?
It's all interconnected, like you said. And I think that this is giving us the cultural ammunition to tackle and to take back all that was taken from us. When we say rights of nature, it's still implied that we're separate from it. So rights of nature means rights of us, rights of our tribal people, rights of our tribal ways, rights of our language. So I think that we're moving towards a place where really what we're doing is we're reviving our dormant worldview. And that is what we're giving breath to. And that, once it's recognized and once you breathe it in, and we're all now living off of something that we've been so deprived from, then everything else will just reemerge. It's like a garden, that has been void of water, where if we start to focus on this area, naturally things will gravitate and move and the entire ecosystem will come alive again. So I think that it's okay to start, and we're all doing the work, first of all, and it's almost like there's this huge resurgence of land back, of language, of rights of nature, and I'm excited to see the fruits of our labor because it's happening.
It's happening, and it needs everybody. Like I said, all hands on deck. I think why this matters and this exercise that we just laid out for you, that they've been through, that we're going through, and we're about to go through, is all relative to everything in tribal governance. They have to clean up their ship, right? I mean, and I jokingly tell clients all the time, it's like, you picture yourself on a ship and there's holes in your ship. And are you going to be down there just plugging holes all day long? Or are you going to leave some people upstairs to find out why the holes are there and how you can make sure no more holes are coming? Or you're just going to be down on the bottom in sewage fixing holes all day long? How do you fix that? And I think we get so reactionary in tribal government. We're always underfunded and overextended. My client says this is their number one. We don't have time to do this. We're going to outsource you, Samantha, to just do this one thing, get it done with, because we know it'll get done. And so that's how that happens. And I think about this exercise where, okay, we have to kind of start balancing out triage mode into forward governance. And so this is a governance cleanup exercise beyond anything ever, where we are moving past treaty rights litigation only, and we are moving into corporate governance. We're moving into self-governance. We've been doing it for decades, and our predecessor tribal leaders and even Congress people have laid out a pathway with the Indian Self-Determination Act and other things that even fell short are still somewhere in the game plan, something to work with, that we can do these things going forward. And so, what does that mean that's interconnected? Well, how are you going to get your land back if your governance is not running tip-top shape? How do you get your language back if your governance is not running tip-top shape? What if you went and got language grants for $2 million, you only spent $100,000, nobody will work for you and you have to give the money back? So we have all these things we want to do for our nations, but we have to run a clean ship and be ready to do that, and where we can't do, where the human resources fall short, we have to outsource that and bring in the help and bring in the allies to get that stuff done. And everything under the umbrella of tribal governance is affected by the ability of how that ship is being worked, right? So that's the way I see this, and that it's a good exercise to get these things squared up so we can do this right.
Well, thank you all so much. Yes, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
And just remember, we're all lawmakers.